If you're like most parents, the idea of talking to your kids about sex fills you with dread. But it's a really important conversation to have because you want them to be safe and informed. My videos are about bringing mental health into every home. In my clinical practice, I work with a lot of parents. So I'm going to highlight some basic principles and then give you 9 helpful tips for how to approach having conversations with your children about sex. Conversations about sex should actually start when they're very young. The ideal age to start talking about sex is between 2 to 3 years old. But the second best time is right now. Even if your kids are already older, even if they're teenagers, even if they're already at university, it's better late than never. And keep in mind that they may not know about the things you would like them to know about. They may know more than you think, but less than they should. You can't leave it to biology class or to sex ed at school. For a start, sex ed is usually only started in secondary school level, which is a bit late, and it's far from comprehensive. If you don't teach your kids the basics about boundaries, privacy, touching, and procreation, then they're going to learn it from influences in their environment, such as their friends, their peers, from jokes on the playground or social media, or, horrible though it is to think about it, porn. Your child may already have seen porn. Children growing up these days are exposed to the kinds of influences that people growing up before the age of social media cannot imagine. But it's a reality that parents have to acknowledge. It's really helpful for your child to have some context and perspective about what they may see or learn about online. So if you're wondering how to get started having conversations about sex, then here's a quick guide for how to talk to your children. Tip number 1, be open and honest. It's probably going to be awkward. Especially if your kids are older, you're going to feel awkward. You need to do the work by yourself in advance and prep yourself that even if you feel awkward, you will continue. It is actually quite helpful if you acknowledge to your child and in front of your child that it's difficult to talk about. You can say things like, my parents never had this kind of conversation with me, or I wish that my parents had talked to me more about this kind of thing. And it feels a little bit awkward to me, but I think it's really important that you and I talk about something that's a reality for the human species, for every species. You need to prepare yourself to talk plainly, using plain language, and to answer any questions that they might come up with, even if the questions are a bit weird. Tip number 2, use cues from life or from social media or from things like TV shows. So if someone at school or in your circle of friends or family member falls pregnant, then that's a great opportunity to talk about sex. If something happens in a TV show that you're watching, you can use that as the starting point for this conversation. Tip number 3 is don't do it all at once. Have lots of mini conversations over the years. You do not need to have the talk and say it all in one go. That puts far too much pressure on you and your child. Prepare to have multiple small conversations and talk about these things as they come up. Tip number 4, use neutral language. Avoid making assumptions about sexuality, and please avoid saying things in a judgmental way. Do not say negative things about gender or sexual orientation. If you do, you risk alienating your child and ensuring that they will not confide in you if this is something that they're struggling with. Keep in mind that this is a conversation, not a lecture. If you're enjoying this video so far, please hit the subscribe button or smash that like button because it really helps with the algorithm. Tip number 5, don't make it into a huge, big deal. Keep it calm and ordinary. Do not sit your children down and launch into preamble and make it awkward and uncomfortable for everybody. Rather bring it up casually. You can talk about it in the car. You can talk about it while washing the dishes or doing any kind of chore. It's nice actually to have an activity while you talk to your kids about sex because it gives everybody something to look at instead of having to look at one another if you do feel super awkward. You can have these conversations over the dinner table. That is because sex is an ordinary part of life. You can discuss sex in the same kind of way that you would discuss things like healthy ways of eating, for example. Tip number 6, keep those mini conversations short and keep them simple. Use clear, simple, and appropriate language. Obviously, you're going to tailor it according to the age of your child. Always avoid graphic details, no matter what the age of your child is. Do not show them graphic pictures. And never ever talk to them about your own sex life, especially not in any kind of detail. Do not use porn as an aid to explaining sex to your children. It's really not helpful. Keep it simple, keep it clear, keep it plain. If the child has questions, answer the questions, and then move on to a different topic of conversation and make sure to bring it up again and have another mini conversation about it within the next few days or the next couple of weeks. Tip number 7, use the proper names of body parts. If your child is small, teach them to use the proper names of each part of their body in the same way that you would teach them the name of their eyes and their noses and their arms and their legs. Don't use euphemisms. Talking about the birds and the bees or your private area or down there, this is not really helpful. And in fact, it makes children feel like there's something different and weird about their sexual parts. If you've already established some kind of euphemistic name for your child's genitals, then say the real anatomical name followed by the euphemism. For example, a person with a penis, what we call your pee-pee. After that, you can start using the proper names as a norm in your home. Tip number 8 is to discuss consent in terms that your child will understand, in other words, relevant to their age. Also, you can discuss birth control from a very young age, but keeping the language appropriate and relevant to their age group. When it comes to consent, teach your children about physical boundaries. You can do this in normal everyday life. Do not force your children to hug or kiss relatives and friends, especially if they don't want to. Also teach them that they should ask if it's okay to touch another person. So they should ask if it's okay to give their friend a hug on the playground. If your child is older and you've already set a precedent and you've already forced them to hug and kiss relatives when they didn't want to, because maybe in your culture that is what is considered appropriate, or that is what you thought should be appropriate, it is not appropriate. Children should never be forced to physically touch somebody else when they don't want to, because what you're teaching them is that their boundaries and their bodies are not under their control and they do not have the right to refuse consent for physical touch when in fact they do. But if you've already set up this kind of precedent with your kids, then acknowledge it. Talk to them. Say, you know what? I've realized that I made a mistake by forcing you to kiss on TP all of these years. Ask them how they feel about it and make things change from this point forwards. In parenting, it's not about the mistakes that you make. It's about how you repair those mistakes. And it doesn't matter, even if your child is older, you can still begin to teach these lessons. You can ask your kids, what do they think they should do when Auntie B wants a kiss and they don't want to? How can they negotiate the situation in a way that doesn't leave Auntie B feeling horribly disrespected or you feeling embarrassed as a parent, but that also respects your child's right to have consent and the right to refuse touch with another person, then allow your child to set their own boundaries going forward. Be curious. Ask questions. Ask your child, what do they think? What do they know? Have they ever wondered how people have sex? How did they feel after watching that scene in whatever movie you were watching? Or what do they think? How do they think babies are made? Be interested. Be interested in what they know and how they experience you telling them this and what it's like to talk about it with you. When you approach your children from a stance of curiosity, from a stance of believing them to be independent beings who have their own journey to negotiate in this world, and your job is just to keep them safe. Your job is to give them the basics so they can grow and unfold as they travel through their life. Keep in mind that you are the most important role model when it comes to talking to your kids about sex. If you talk about it as if it's something embarrassing, as if it's something shameful, then your children will be very likely to feel that it is something shameful or it is something embarrassing to talk about. If you approach your children with a matter-of-fact, interested, informative, and curious mindset, then the conversation is probably going to flow a lot easier. And even if it doesn't, the fact that you're trying breaks the ice. And keep in mind, you don't have to do it all in one conversation. Have many, many conversations along the way. Lastly, I want you to remember that parents make mistakes. It is normal to make mistakes. Even if you've made big mistakes, to err is human. It's not about the mistakes that you make as a parent. It's about how you attempt to repair those mistakes and how you come back after a mistake. It's about how you move forward from here. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know in the comments, and if you'd like me to make more videos like this, or if you have specific questions that you'd like me to answer, let me know in the comments.